let's get right into it. The story of Good Friday. I mean, we all think we know it, right? You've got the Last Supper, the trial, the crucifixion. It's probably one of the most famous stories in the world. But what if I told you there's this massive contradiction, like hiding in plain sight right there in the Gospels? That's the puzzle we're going to unpack today.
And you know, it all boils down to what seems like a really simple question. When exactly was the Last Supper? Seems obvious, right? But as you're about to see, the Gospels themselves give us two totally different answers. And figuring out why, well, that opens up this amazing window into what these ancient writers were actually trying to do.
Okay, so let's start digging for clues. First piece of evidence. We're going to go to the Gospel of Mark, which most scholars think is the earliest of the four Gospels. So what does Mark have to say about the timing of that famous final meal?
And wow, the language Mark uses here it's incredibly specific. He says, on the first day of unleavened bread, when they sacrificed the Passover lamb. And then Jesus himself asks, where is my guest room where I may eat the Passover with my disciples? I mean, you can't get much clearer than that, right? He's literally saying the Passover. So, what's the takeaway from Mark? It's that the Last Supper wasn't just some random dinner. No way. It was the Passover Seder, the most important ritual meal in the entire Jewish year. The one that remembers the Exodus from Egypt. They are right in the middle of the festival.
And this has a really important knock-on effect for the timeline. See, in the ancient Jewish calendar, the new day didn't start at midnight, it started at sundown. So if they ate the Passover meal on what we call Thursday evening, then Friday, the day of the crucifixion, was technically the same day. This puts the crucifixion happening smack dab on the first official day of the Passover festival. Okay, just tuck that fact away for a minute.
All right, so Mark seems crystal clear. Case closed, right? Well, not so fast. Let's bring in our second piece of evidence. Now we're going to jump ahead to the Gospel of John, which was written, decades after Mark. And get this, it tells a completely different story. So, this quote comes from the scene where Pilate is presenting Jesus to the crowd, right before he's condemned to die. And listen to the timing John gives us. Now, it was the day of preparation of the Passover. That phrase, day of preparation, that is our big clue. And it flips the whole timeline on its head. So what on earth is the day of preparation? Well, it's pretty much exactly what it sounds like. It's the day before the Passover festival officially kicks off at sundown. This was the day when everyone in Jerusalem would bring their lambs to the temple to be slaughtered, getting them ready for the big Passover meal that evening. And this is where the two accounts just collide. Because in John's version, Jesus is on trial and being sentenced at the same time that the lambs are being prepared. That means his death on the cross happens before anyone has even eaten the Passover meal. The festival hasn't even officially started yet. So now we've got these two Gospels, Mark and John, giving us two totally different timelines for the most crucial events of the week. Let's just put them side by side so we can see just how different they really are. Okay, just look at this. In Mark's timeline, the Last Supper is the Passover meal. The crucifixion happens on day one of the festival. But in John's timeline, the Last Supper is just a meal before Passover, and the crucifixion happens on the day of preparation before the festival begins. I mean, they can't both be right, historically speaking.
So, this brings us right to the heart of the puzzle. Which one is it? Which account is historically accurate? And maybe, just maybe, the more interesting question is, why is there a difference? Is this just a sloppy mistake, or is there something much deeper going on here? The source material suggests a pretty amazing answer.
And the explanation isn't really about finding a historical typo and correcting it. No, it's about seeing the author of John's Gospel as an incredible artist, making a deliberate and really powerful theological point. The different timing isn't an accident, it's everything.
So to get what John is doing, we have to understand this key concept, Lamb of God Christology. It's a bit of a mouthful, but the idea is simple. Right from the very start of his gospel, John the Baptist points at Jesus and says, "Behold, the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world." This isn't a throwaway line. It's a theme that runs through the entire book. For John, Jesus is the ultimate Passover lamb.
And this is where it all clicks. By having Jesus crucified on the day of preparation, John creates this unbelievably powerful symbol. Think about it. At the exact time that thousands of Passover lambs are being slaughtered in the temple, John shows us the Lamb of God being sacrificed on the cross. The parallel isn't just a coincidence, it's intentional, and it's absolutely breathtaking.
John even weaves in these little details to really hammer the point home. Remember when the soldiers come to break the legs of the men on the crosses to make them die faster? Well, they get to Jesus, and he's already dead, so they don't break his bones. John makes sure to tell us that, and then he quotes a very specific rule from the book of Exodus about how the original Passover lamb was supposed to be treated. Not a bone of it was to be broken.
So, you see, for John, the timing isn't about getting the historical sequence right like a modern journalist would. It's about communicating a profound theological truth. He actually shifted the timeline to make the most powerful statement he possibly could, that Jesus' death is the final, ultimate Passover sacrifice.
And this really leads us to a much bigger idea about how we can even read these ancient texts. The source material we're looking at here argues that the Gospels aren't just eyewitness reports. They're not trying to be neutral, minute-by-minute historical records. Instead, we can read them as theological stories. Each writer, Mark, John, Matthew, Luke, they're all carefully crafting a narrative. They're selecting details, they're arranging them, and yes, sometimes they're even changing things like the timeline of the crucifixion, all to communicate their specific message about who Jesus was and what his life and death meant.
So we're kind of left with this final question, aren't we? When we find a contradiction like this, are we supposed to look at it as a historical problem that we need to solve? Or is it a theological message that we need to understand? Maybe the real richness of these texts isn't about choosing one over the other, but learning to appreciate how they can be both history and theology, all at the same time. Really makes you think, doesn't it?